a problem, but the transfer by the Israelis to the Iranians was itself a violation of the Arms Export Control Act, and our consent to it was similarly a violation. Now, was that brought to your attention at the time?
No, but what was, in fact, I don't think anybody, you probably find something different, but I don't remember anybody saying, Ollie, what was done is wrong. But I do remember at some point in here saying, look, you had a presidential decision back in July that authorized this thing. The way you, North, are trying to go about this by making it a covert buy under a normal foreign assistance sale isn't right. The way to do it is to make a purchase under the Economy Act from the CIA, or the CIA buys it from the Pentagon, and that's the way to do it. That's what I'm saying. It wasn't a matter of someone trying to evade or avoid. It was a matter of getting this kid smart, because I'd been given the job of replenishing. And so that's the way we went about doing it.
Okay, just to make sure my question is clear, and there are two of them.
Yeah.
One is, to your recollection, was this transaction halted in midstream because the Israelis got cold feet because they didn't think they were going to get replenishments?
No, my recollection at this point in time is it was stopped solely because the product delivered was not what the buyer wanted. That's my recollection. And that was the big problem.
Okay,
and then it became a problem to get them back out of there.
You've also testified that the deputy director at CIA hit the roof and insisted...
Your words.
And insisted you use some expression like that, and that the CIA decided that a finding was required.
That's correct.
Did the delay in getting the finding signed provide a reason to halt shipments?
No, because I was led to believe, and I can't recall exactly how, but at that point in time that the president had made a finding, or made a decision back in July that authorized this to proceed. I was then in a meeting with Admiral Poindexter, or on the telephone with Admiral Poindexter, to confirm that this shipment should go forward. And I have a contemporaneous note that the president redecided at that point to let this go forward. And so the problem that you see here is one of North having been given, in addition to get this stuff over there, then finding out it wasn't the buyer's product that he wanted. Now has a replenishment problem for the original 508 that he didn't know he started with. And the whole thing is now stopped dead, cold. And that's basically where we were by the early part of January. With the 18 Hawks sitting over there, 508 Hawks owed to the Israelis, the whole project dead in the water, and people concerned.
Did you become aware of some kind of...
Correct the record, sir. It was 508 tows, not Hawks.
Did you become aware at some point during this time that there was some kind of an investigation or a scandal or a problem in Israel that had to do with halting further shipments?
Not that I recall now. Not that I recall that I knew then. That there was some discussion many, many weeks later as to perhaps that had, and when I say weeks later, maybe months later, that did have something to do with it. But I did not even know about it at the time.
When you say that the buyer was unhappy with the merchandise, did this have to do with the fact that the missiles were Hawks, or was it the kind of Hawk?
Well, again, I'm not a Hawk expert, but General Secord explained it to me, and I think he actually explained it to Mr. McFarland and Admiral Poindexter at one point. But apparently what the Israelis had told Ghorbanifar, and Ghorbanifar had told the Iranians, and I don't know who's to blame, and I'm not trying to assess that, but from what we saw in the sensitive intelligence and what we were told by subsequent interviews with the Iranians themselves, who I sat down and talked with, is they were promised something that would shoot down airplanes at 60, 70,000 feet, in excess of that, specifically Soviet reconnaissance flights and Iraqi bombers at high altitude. And those were, I was told that's what they were looking for, as a weapon system to deal with that. Clearly, the Hawk system, in any version, was inadequate to that task. And they expected to get some product that was different than the one they received. And I am told that that is why they were unhappy and why the program stopped at that point.
Who in the NSC, besides yourself, if anyone, was dealing with officials at the Department of Defense on the replenishment issue?
The only other person I know for sure was dealing with the DOD on that is Admiral Poindexter, and I guess Mr. McFarland. But I know that I had to go to Admiral Poindexter a couple of times and say, hey, look, I'm having a problem here with A, B, or C, and can you help? And he would either call or write or whatever it was done, and then I'd get a call back and we'd get on with it.
Was that the case with respect to this Hawk replenishment issue?
Yeah, again, I'm having a hard time recalling exactly what was transpiring at the time. I know I was inquiring at the DOD probably about both the cost and the method for replenishing the Hawks, which had been shipped in September, a problem I hadn't even known about until November, and replenishing and replacing Hawks, which looked to me to be a very big problem, both in terms of dollars and in size and weight, visibility. The whole thing was just a nightmare.
And who had authorized you to go to the Department of Defense and seek replenishment of the Hawks?
Admiral Poindexter or Mr. McFarland. I did not go to the Pentagon, nor would they have answered me when I called if I didn't have authority. I'm sorry. Were you talking about replenishment of Hawks or TOWs or both?
Hawks.
Well, I would guess it was the same authority for both.
Admiral Poindexter or Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Do you know whether either of them communicated directly with the Department of Defense officials on the issue of replenishment of Hawks?
I do not, and I do not know that they ever communicated for sure that they communicated directly on the issue of TOWs. But I would like to point out that if a Marine Lieutenant Colonel called the Pentagon this afternoon and asked for 500 TOWs to be shipped overseas, and he didn't have a little more backing than oak leaves on his collar, they'd come and collar him and take him away. So I mean, I had authority to do that, counsel. I want you to understand that. I don't know exactly who called who, but I was talking to General Colin Powell, who was the aide to Secretary Weinberger. At various points, I talked to Mr. Cook. I eventually ended up talking to Mr. Armitage. And then when we finally got around to doing it the right way, through the Economy Act, in fact, the only way it was ever done, I was talking with CIA logisticians and logisticians out at the Pentagon.
So what you're saying is that somebody, either Admiral Poindexter or Mr. McFarland, gave you the authority to go to DOD and seek replenishment?
Yes.
Do you recall reporting to one or both of them concerning your contacts with DOD on the subject of Hawks?
I recall reporting to both of them voluminously about this whole problem.
All right. You're getting
you probably got the records and I don't. So
you're getting into the next area I want to take up, which is who in the government was aware of the Hawk transaction at the time it occurred. And I take it you were aware.
I was aware.
Admiral Poindexter was aware.
Yes, he was.
Mr. McFarland was aware.
That's correct.
You've already given some testimony about Dewey Claridge. I'd like to ask you a few more questions about that. And I'd like you to turn to a page from your spiral notebooks, which again are Exhibit 69A, and this one is dated the 25th of November.
Dated again, sir?
It's the 25th of November, but I'm actually going to ask you to take a look at the last entry on the 24th of November 1st.
We seem to go from 28